Unless you are really old, you don't remember a time in your life when there wasn't a battle going on between the Coca-Cola bottling company and Pepsi-Cola. Because Coke started out in 1886 and Pepsi marks its beginning officially in 1903. So for more than 100 years, there have been the cola wars going on. And there have been new products and new advertising campaigns and all kinds of weapons in the war. And so far, Coke is winning. As a worldwide product, it is about 10 percentage points ahead in the market for Pepsi. Back in 2006, an administrative assistant at the Coke headquarters sneaked out of the headquarters building some documents. She put them in her purse, documents that outlined the details of some new products that Coke had coming out, as well as all of their promotional strategy and advertising. She even stole a sample of a beverage that had not yet been announced. And then, with the help of two other Coke employees, she wrote a letter to Pepsi and offered to sell these Coke company secrets to the enemy. And Pepsi had an opportunity for a relatively low cost to get ahead of Coca-Cola. So what should Pepsi do? Well, the executives at Pepsi called Coke and told them what had happened, and the executives at Coca-Cola called the FBI. And a sting operation was set up for this administrative assistant who thought that she was getting $1.5 million from Pepsi, but found out that instead she was being arrested. And Dave DeSecco, who was the spokesperson for Pepsi-Cola, said, "We were just doing what any responsible company would do." So, hooray for Pepsi. Buy a Pepsi this week to congratulate them for what they did, because they did the right thing. Although you can't help but wonder if the Pepsi people were not tempted to do the wrong thing, because most of us are. That's why we pray in the Lord's Prayer, "Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil." So let's suppose that you are tempted to do something that is wrong, and you make a deliberate choice not to do it. Does that mean that you are thereafter inoculated from that temptation? Does it mean that you are guaranteed that you will never succumb in the future? Is it sort of like getting a vaccination or like having the measles or the chicken pox, that it's never going to come around again? That if you say no to stealing, to adultery, to gossip, to murder, to any of the other sins we might commit, that thereafter you are home free from further temptation that might come back and haunt you on another day? Well, let's ask David, because he knows. It happened to him. We've been following the Old Testament biography of David, and a couple of weeks ago, we read the story in 1 Samuel chapter 24 of David's opportunity to kill Israel's king Saul. David had done nothing wrong, and actually he had pretty much done everything right. But King Saul was jealous of his popularity, and so he set out on a vendetta to kill him. And in one of the Bible's strangest stories, in this chase, David hides in the back of a cave when, of all people, King Saul comes into the cave to go to the bathroom. He's alone, and David has an opportunity to kill him. And he chooses not to do it. He resists temptation. He lets Saul live. David did the right thing. And kind of amazingly, Saul acknowledged that. He admitted that he was wrong and that David was right, but that didn't change his behavior. He continued to hunt after David to kill him. And then, a short time later, another opportunity came, a similar opportunity, an opportunity for David to kill the king and save his own life. And that second round of temptation is recorded in 1 Samuel chapter 26. So I invite you to your own Bible in 1 Samuel 26, or if you don't have it today, to look at page 462 here in our Wooddale Bible. The Ziphites went to Saul at Gibeah and said, "Is not David hiding on the hill of Hachilah, which faces Jeshimon?" So Saul went down to the desert of Ziph with his 3,000 chosen men of Israel to search there for David. Saul made his camp beside the road on the hill of Hachilah facing Jeshimon. But David stayed in the desert. When he saw that Saul had followed him there, he sent out scouts and learned that Saul had definitely arrived. Then David set out and went to the place where Saul had camped. He saw where Saul and Abner, the son of Ner, the commander of the army, had lain down. Saul was lying inside the camp with the army encamped around him. David then asked Ahimelech the Hittite and Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, Joab's brother, "Who will go down into the camp with me?" "I'll go with you," said Abishai. So David and Abishai went to the army by night, and there was Saul lying asleep inside the camp with his spear stuck in the ground near his head. Abner and the soldiers were lying around him. Abishai said to David, "Today God has delivered your enemy into your hands. Now let me pin him to the ground with one thrust of my spear. I won't strike him twice." So the story starts out with the Ziphites, who were loyal to King Saul, and they functioned sort of like the CIA in that they were bringing intelligence to the king about the whereabouts of David, who was being pursued. And they told the king that David was hiding out in the southern desert of Judea. And so Saul went with his army of 3,000 after. It was a huge mismatch. Saul had 3,000 men who were well trained, who were well fed, who were experienced and equipped, and David had only a fifth of that number. Only 600 in an army that was marginal and recently organized and under-resourced. Although it was starting to shape up. So there was a division of labor, and there were some who were scouts for David's tiny little army, and those scouts reported the location of Saul's army to David. David could have run, and maybe David should have run. But he didn't. He was fascinated by Saul, and he was attracted to the risk. So David decided to check out the army that was after him, and he asked if anyone wanted to go along with him. And then he was joined by one other soldier, Abishai, from his own small army, and they decided to sneak into the camp of King Saul. And apparently, the king was asleep in the middle of concentric circles. So the king was in the middle, and then his high officers were around him, and then the rest of the army was around them. So he really had 3,000 personal bodyguards that were watching out for him. David and Abishai went right into the middle during the night, which to me seems just obviously foolish, just arrogant. And I sensed that David's heart was just pumping with the adrenaline, that he was filled with excitement and with anticipation because, well, there was something about David that was given to risk-taking. It was kind of addictive to him. He loved the adrenaline high that came with this. And it almost seems as if David, who had been timid and running, is now kind of arrogant and overly self-assured that he can look danger right in the face and not worry about what his response or his behavior might be. You kind of compare him to the teenager who just got a driver's license or maybe doesn't have it yet and takes the family car and drags down some main street at 100 miles an hour or faster. Or the 20-something participating in risky sex, saying, oh, well, she won't get infected. Other people may, but she's not going to worry about it. Or it's the married guy who flirts with his coworker and is self-assured that he knows exactly when he can shut it off and there is no danger of some kind of extramarital affair. Or it's the executive who thinks that he can spin the books because he did it once before and he got away with it, and so he can do it again. So David took an awful chance. And in doing it, David faced a repeat temptation. He who had resisted killing Saul once before, saying that Saul was God's anointed and he wouldn't lay a hand on God's anointed, finds himself before the sleeping king with the king's own spear stuck in the ground near his head. And David had to make a decision. In some ways, it must have been a kind of easy decision, because he could rationalize it and say that he didn't actually kill him, but it was his assistant, his co-soldier who came along. Abishai was there, and he made the offer to just do it. He would run the king through. He would do it in one stab. It would be over. There wouldn't be a sound. It would be finished. And so what is David to do? What would you do? Now, I know what your immediate reaction is. It's the same reaction as I have. Of course I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't take another person's life. I wouldn't kill someone who was sleeping. How ridiculous is this? But you know, we should never overestimate our own morality. We should never credit ourselves that if we were in the situation that someone else has faced, that we would be the ones who would not be vulnerable. You know, there are studies that show that the second and the third and the fifth and the 10th time you face temptation, it is actually more likely that you will succumb to it than the first time. Because the first time out, we have our guard up. The first time around, we are defensive. The first time, we are unsure. But by the time we have a second or a 16th opportunity, we've actually thought about it. We've imagined what it would be like. We have perceived how we might get away with it. And so we actually are more vulnerable the next time around than the first time around, realizing that none of us is exempt from any of the temptations or evils that are out there. Indeed, perhaps it is easier to surrender to temptation the second time around. We're not so scared by cheating or lying or killing. We're not afraid of the returns. Our defenses are down. So maybe if we were walking in David's sandals, maybe we would. But David didn't. He didn't do it. Maybe he wanted to, but he resisted the temptation. David said to Abishai, "Don't destroy him. Who can lay a hand on the Lord's anointed and be guiltless? As surely as the Lord lives," he said, "the Lord himself will strike him. Either his time will come and he will die, or he will go into battle and perish. But the Lord forbid that I should lay a hand on the Lord's anointed. Now get the spear and water jug that are near his head, and let's go." So David, we are discovering, is growing up. He's increasing in maturity and in wisdom. He does something here which shows that maturity, in that he is distinguishing between the man, Saul, and the office which he held. That he was a man who was a jerk. He was a lousy king. He was a would-be murderer. He was someone who had actually stolen David's wife, who was his daughter, and given her away in a forced marriage to another man. He was despicable, but he was the king. And he held that crown by God's choice. God had put this despicable man in this office of king of Israel. And so David, amazingly and with stunning maturity, distinguishes between his disagreements with the man and his deference and respect and protection for the God-anointed king of Israel. It is A challenge that we all face frequently at work, in politics, in government, in relationships, in family, that there may be those who are in positions of high authority, perhaps a president of the United States or a senator or a company CEO. This is someone with whom we may disagree on a day-to-day basis in the workplace, in the office, but we recognize that this is someone who holds a position, and we distinguish between the position and the person. We recall the words of the New Testament in Romans chapter 13, that everyone must submit himself to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. So it is for David and it is for us a sign of wisdom and maturity when we can distinguish between the person and the office. Also, we can see David's growing wisdom and maturity in that he trusted God to deal with his enemy. David said, if God wants to have Saul die, then God can do that. God can have him die right here on the spot. God can have him killed in battle. God can have him die of old age or of some natural cause. But David said, that's up to God. It's not mine to do. It's not for me to take a life. David was growing up that he understood that he was not to play God. And this too is a choice that we all face as well, that we need to let God deal with our enemies and not harshly deal with them ourselves. That a wise and mature Christian trusts God to deal with others, that we don't have to attack, that we can truly believe that God can deal with situations that are beyond our responsibility. David resisted the temptation to destroy his enemy, but I will tell you that he did take full political advantage of what happened. So David took the spear and the water jug near Saul's head, and they left. No one saw or knew about it, nor did anyone wake up. They were all sleeping because the Lord had put them into a deep sleep. Then David crossed over to the other side and stood on top of the hill some distance away. There was a wide space between them. He called out to the army and to Abner, the son of Ner. Aren't you going to answer me, Abner? Abner replied, Who are you who calls to the king? David said, You're a man, aren't you? And who is like you in Israel? Why didn't you guard your lord the king? Someone came to destroy your lord the king. What you have done is not good. As surely as the Lord lives, you and your men deserve to die because you did not guard your master, the Lord's anointed. Look around you. Where are the king's spear and water jug that were near his head? So David was a really astute politician. First of all, he walked the distance so he could make sure he was out of range of these people with spears and swords. And then he started shouting to awaken Saul and awaken the army. And then, sort of as a show and tell, he says, look what I've got. And he holds up the king's water bottle and the king's sword. And everybody quickly recognizes that he had been there. And he had the power to take the king's life. And that the elite of Israel's army hadn't protected King Saul. And then he laid the blame on the commanding general of the army, a man named Abner, seeking apparently to undermine his authority in the army of Israel. And then, to add irony to all of this insult, Abner was actually King Saul's cousin. So he was saying, what kind of a man are you? You should have done your job and you're sound asleep on duty. Now, most of this record here is dialogue. But the historian who is writing the record, in addition to the dialogue, adds his own editorial comments. So I read to you again 1 Samuel 26, verse 12. So David took the spear and water jug near Saul's head, and they left. No one saw or knew about it, nor did anyone wake up. They were all sleeping because the Lord had put them into a deep sleep. This sounds like a news story about Northwest Airlines and Minneapolis Airport. I bet. I hardly even know what to say here. Apparently, it seems that God sort of gave them all a dose of Tylenol PM, and the entire army is sound asleep all night while David and his colleague walk through the army. God caused them to have a deep snooze because God was behind what was happening. Now, sometimes when we read something like this, we think, well, that's not fair. Why would God get involved in something like this? Although it is interesting that we continually pray for God to get involved in ways like this. We say, whatever the situation is, and especially if it's tense and difficult, God, we would like you to engage here. We would like you to make the circumstances different. We would like you to do something that overrules the usual way that things are done. And so what we have here is an intriguing combination of the absolute and clear responsibility of God and of these individuals. So God was engaged, but they were also responsible for their own behavior. And that's the way it is for us and for our lives, that we are to be righteous, we are to be responsible in what we say and how we behave, but never underestimate the overarching power and presence of God in the circumstances of what is happening, and God's own determination of ultimately what will occur. Saul recognized David's voice and said, "Is that your voice, David, my son?" David replied, "Yes, it is, my lord the king." And he added, "Why is my lord pursuing his servant? What have I done, and what wrong am I guilty of? Now let my lord the king listen to his servant's words. If the Lord has incited you against me, then may he accept an offering. If, however, men have done it, may they be cursed before the Lord. They have now driven me from my share in the Lord's inheritance and have said, 'Go serve other gods.' Now do not let my blood fall to the ground far from the presence of the Lord. The king of Israel has come out to look for a flea, as one hunts a partridge in the mountains." So David tries to reason with this crazy king. He offers a solution, a middle way, a compromise, an out for the mess that they were in. He's saying that if this is primarily a spiritual conflict, primarily that God has caused all of this to happen, then let's get together and offer a sacrifice to God and make it right with him. If, on the other hand, this is not God's doing, but this is some human sin and error, then let's confront it. Let's go to whoever is responsible. He doesn't name Saul, but Saul really is the one who is responsible, and confront that human misbehavior, but let's deal with this. And then he tries to put Saul's behavior in a larger context. He says, the king of Israel has come out to look for a flea. And David is referring to himself. He's saying, Saul, you've got an entire country to rule. You have millions of people that are looking to you for leadership. The country is engaged in a war against the nation of Philistia. There are 1,000 issues to address, problems and opportunities, and the last thing you ought to be doing is chasing around in the mountains looking for a flea. I'm nobody. I'm nothing. This doesn't matter. Besides, I'm loyal to you. This is just sheer nonsense. And his point is that Saul needed a larger perspective instead of getting caught up in the trivia. Recently, I had a friend of mine say to me that when he was growing up, his mother, when he would really get worked up about something, would sit him down, look him in the eye, and say, "And what difference is this going to make 100 years from now?" Probably didn't even make any difference that she said that, actually. But, if we could only have that kind of perspective that David is here encouraging. It's easy to let little tiny fleas of things escalate until they are far more than ever they should be. It is an easy thing for a couple to let an argument escalate until it ends in a dissolution of their marriage and they forget what the argument is about. There are people in prison who got into a fight that ended up taking a life, and it was a fight over a television set or a slice of pizza or something totally trivial. Well, it seemed to work that Saul for a moment was rational, and he promised that he would not pursue David any longer, but he had promised this lots of times before, and he would quickly forget his promise and go right back to his former evil ways. And this became the last time in recorded history that David and his mentor Saul saw each other. This was the last time that they spoke. Saul said, "I have sinned. Come back, David, my son, because you considered my life precious today. I will not try to harm you again. Surely I have acted like a fool and have erred greatly." "Here is the king's spear," David answered. "Let one of your young men come over and get it. The Lord rewards every man for his righteousness and faithfulness. The Lord delivered you into my hands today, but I would not lay a hand on the Lord's anointed. As surely as I valued your life today, so may the Lord value my life and deliver me from all trouble." Then Saul said to David, "May you be blessed, my son David. You will do great things and surely triumph." So David went on his way, and Saul returned home. David did what was right, even when he was tempted to do what was wrong. He was on the side of righteousness. He did what was right for righteousness' sake and for God's sake. Not because the outcome was what he wanted it to be, because the outcome was not what he wanted it to be. And therein is the great lesson for us, that we do what is right and we do what is righteous. We do it because it's for God. I can't vouch for David every day. There are other days in which he did things that are difficult for me to get over and to excuse. But here on this day, David resisted temptation and he did what was right regardless of the outcome. And what about us? How does this translate into our lives in our generation, in our 21st century? Well, I can pretty much promise you that within the next week or two, you will have an opportunity to live out precisely what is here. That there will be someone you don't like, some enemy, some person, and you will have a question of how to respond to that person. And a decision to respond righteously. Someone with whom you disagree, that you in fact can actually treat well. We will have opportunities to speak ill of those in government. We need to watch our tongues. We need to remember David, but we need to recall the words of Jesus, who said in Luke 6, "Do not judge, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over will be poured into your lap. For with the measure you use, it will be measured to you." God, may the measure that we use in the challenging circumstances of our lives, may the measure we use be like that of David and like that of Jesus. May we do what is right and righteous, not for the outcome's sake, but for Jesus' sake. Amen.